Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ordinary Time. I'm so grateful to present another episode, this time interviewing a dear friend of mine by the name of David Davis. David, thank you so much for joining me, or should I say me joining you today.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
I think it's important to build the context because when I think about the last person I ever expected to be Catholic, it wasn't me, it was David Davis.
That is absolutely true.
You really were probably the
true.
last person I would ever
Yeah.
think of I would have seen in the Catholic Church.
So true.
You're the son of a Baptist preacher.
Yes.
You've spent your entire lifetime in leadership in a Christian
Yes.
church, Protestant church.
That's right.
You have every reason not to become Catholic. Let's talk about the background though first, before we just get too critical here.
Yeah.
Right? Let's talk about your background if you don't mind. Let's get started with, your story.
Yeah.
Your lifelong involvement in the church and your love for Jesus, because that's one thing I always knew about you is you definitely loved Jesus.
Yeah, that's true. And I grew up the son of a Southern Baptist pastor, and he was, I would say, the man that walked closest to Jesus that I've known. I mean, he was the real deal, and a wonderful, godly mother also. So I was raised in a great home, and have always been active in church. I never had a period of time where I walked away from the church. When I was in college, I was the youth minister at the local church near my college campus, and have never stepped away from the church. But one thing that's kind of interesting is I have explored all kinds of denominations. So, I probably won't be able to name them all, but Southern Baptist most of the time, but also Presbyterian, PCA Church, Methodist Church, non-denomination, Disciples of Christ, and I'm probably leaving out a couple, but I have, and some of that is because I've moved to different locations, but I have tried a lot of different denominations.
You've tried every flavor. I mean,
Yes.
at one point
Yes.
I think I might have said Christianity is like a box of chocolates,
Yeah.
just you never know what you're going to get. You've tried the entire flavor profile.
Yeah, I have. But the one thing I knew I wouldn't try is Catholic.
That's right. You stay away from that one.
That's right.
And so, growing up in a household, I think it's fascinating that you never left the church, because the first thing you typically hear of, the stereotype is the pastor's kid, is usually the first one to kind of run away from the church. What about your mother and father and your upbringing in the faith kind of kept you grounded? Because that is really not the statistically accurate picture.
Yeah, my dad, I sometimes say that my dad could teach Norman Vincent Peale a thing or two about positive thinking. My dad was just such a positive man, so in love with the Lord, and he was just a wonderful role model for me. And he didn't bring church baggage home with him. I didn't ever hear the bad stories about church, even though they were out there. And I've just always really enjoyed going to church. Now, I will say that even though that part was very real to me, that doesn't mean I was actively following Christ all that time. So I would say that a lot of it was habit, maybe like you're in a country club or a social club. It was something I enjoyed going to. I had friends there, but I wasn't always, there was a lot of that period of time where I wasn't following Christ the way I should, not even close.
Yeah, I mean, if we really contemplate and do an examination, we all kind of fall short on that at times.
Yeah.
And so you're married. You've been married for how long?
This is my 40th anniversary this year, so
Praise God.
It's been a long time. Yeah,
Wow.
It is a praise God.
That's a great thing. 40 years of marriage, and you look so young. I mean,
Thank you. I
what's the
appreciate
secret,
that.
David?
Marrying the right woman, I guess.
Marrying the right.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Tell me about your wife. Tell me about Tammy.
Tammy is, I don't know, maybe she's on the path to sainthood. She is an incredibly godly woman, always has been. When I met her, by the way, she was a missionary. Speaking of Baptist, she was a Southern Baptist missionary. The Southern Baptists have foreign missionaries and they have U.S. missionaries, and she was a U.S. missionary assigned to Daytona Beach, and that's where I got my first job out of college. And we met and pretty quickly fell in love. And she, I said I'm a person that went to church but often didn't really live the life that I should. She's been very consistent in her faith, a very deep woman of God, and my return to my faith was preceded with her praying for me year after year after year, because obviously, your wife knows a lot about you, and she knew something was missing in my life. This was before either one of us ever imagined we'd be in the Catholic Church, but she did pray and over and ask God to get my attention, that I would really be really surrendered and committed to Him. So I owe a great deal to her. Yeah.
They say you should be careful what you pray for.
Yeah.
Right? If you pray for patience, then be careful, because you're going to find yourself in situations. How did her prayer for you in that season of life, how did that manifest itself in your faith walk?
I would say that she would say that was a slow prayer to be answered, because, gosh, there's a lot of backstory that we probably don't have time to get into, but there was, even though I had a wonderful parents and grew up in a wonderful family, I also had a lot of baggage that was really unknown to anybody but me. And so I brought a lot of pain into our marriage that, again, she wasn't aware of. And it really affected who I am. I'm a social person. One of my favorite quotes is, "There's no strangers in this world, only friends you've yet to meet." That's kind of my personality. I love to talk to people. But I would also keep very distant from people. I wouldn't go deep, and that included my wife. So, everybody saw me as this great outgoing guy. My church leaders saw me as a great leader in the church. I've been chairman of the board of some of my churches, or at least one of the churches. I've been active in leadership in my churches. So no one could really see inside me. And there was a lot of pain there that had not been dealt with. There was a lot of pain that was keeping me from having the relationship with Jesus that He desired for me. So in some ways, I was kind of living a double life. The man that I really was inside was not really the man that people were seeing, including my wife. And so her prayers took, I'd say, decades to occur. But I think she was at the point, after 30 years of praying, of maybe feeling like she was about ready to give up, because one day on our back porch, she said to me, "I just don't know if I can continue in this marriage because we have no emotional connection." The first time she said that to me, I ignored her. I just thought it was an over-emotional thing on her part. But the second time she said it to me, which may have been weeks or a month after the first time, when I heard it the second time, I knew it was serious. And I knew then that I did not, we never used the word divorce, we never talked about it, talked with attorneys, but I knew it was serious. And that comment is what started to turn things around for me. And it wasn't overnight, but it started a change for me. I started going to counseling by myself, dealing with some of the stuff that I needed to deal with. Also started going to marriage counseling. And one of the amazing things is that our marriage counselor was we didn't know this when we selected her. She had been recommended to us, but not only was she a very devoted Catholic herself, but she was a trained spiritual director in the Catholic Church. And so meeting her and getting to know her was one of the, when I think about the big things that led to us becoming Catholic, that was one of the big ones right there. Mm. Yeah.
So you had to, when it comes to marriage, I'm younger. I've only been married for, maybe a quarter of the amount of time that you've been married. But it's, when you talk about this idea of not being able to give yourself fully to somebody, I feel like there's no greater image of our struggles with our relationship with the Father than the marriage. You know, I'll speak for myself, right? Yeah. I've really been thinking a lot about this lately, is the wounds of abandonment or rejection have caused some layers and really some symptoms to appear as a form of protection. So like, you know, I think our brain processes this type of emotional pain the same way it would of physical pain. So we now don't want to, you know, go near that thing anymore because it hurt us, right? So we kind of, for me, I recognize that even in my marriage, how I put on different personalities. Like I could be clingy and have to constantly seek reassurance and affirmation from my wife to make sure I wasn't doing something wrong, or it would be avoid this. As soon as there was a sign of trouble, retreat, pull away, right? Don't get too close, because you know, if you get too close, they might leave. There's a lot of these like symptoms that come from wounds such as that. And I noticed how much those things mimicked even my own intimacy with God. Yeah. And we think about the church. What does Jesus refer to his church as, right? The bride. Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about the vocation of marriage. Yeah. First of all, I don't know if we understand it's a vocation. Like, you're either married or a priest, right? Or religious. Marriage is a vocation. It's a sacred vocation, right?
For sure.
And not a lot of married people are probably walking around the world today recognizing this sacred vocation and the requirements that come with that vocation. We all understand the vocation of priesthood. We understand they got to do this, they got to take oaths of this and oaths of that, but have we failed to remember the oaths that we made, or are those just words?
Yeah. You know, what came to my mind when you were talking about that was I spent almost my entire life, even though I grew up with great parents and really good churches. I've always, you know, I know a lot of people have had a lot of church pain that's very real. I really have not. I've been in great churches my whole life. I still love all those churches. But even with that great training, I always felt like I was a disappointment to God. And the baggage that I talked about bringing into the marriage was dealing with sexual abuse as a child. And I can remember going through that. First of all, I didn't talk about it for 35 years. And I'm just recently been able to talk about it without still, you know, crying and breaking down. But one of the things I've learned through that is victims often take responsibility and feel like they're to blame, which, you know, is crazy and is wrong. But I felt like back then, even though when it started I was a boy, I remember feeling, I think it started at 6 years old, I remember thinking if my parents knew about this, they'd be disappointed in me, which is the last thing, this farthest from the truth it could be. But that seemed very real to me at the time. I cannot tell my parents because they'd be disappointed in me. And that really started the culture of hiding and not telling things. So I kept that secret, and this was something that was repeated numerous times, and I kept that secret hidden. And I always felt like God was disappointed in me. And I would feel like my parents would be disappointed with me. And then I carried it into my marriage and felt like my wife would be disappointed in me, or my kids would be disappointed in me. And so I never shared that with anybody until I finally shared it with the counselor I was referencing before. And even after acknowledging it to the counselor, it was still probably 3 years later before I had the courage to bring it up to my wife. And so I had this feeling going into my marriage that I can't let my wife see the real me because she would be so disappointed in me. So I hid from her. I was not vulnerable. I I could not, again, the thing that she said to me is, we have no connection emotionally, and that's really where it came from.
Well, first of all, I don't want to glaze over the fact that you were vulnerable, right? Even now, I mean, men are taught to just be tough, tough men, hide it. I mean, we're programmed by society to hide it. I mean, even Adam and Eve, the first reaction to their exposure of sin was to hide it.
That's right.
And see, it's the complete opposite of, like you said yourself, it's crazy and it's just wrong. But yet, all of us fall victim to that particular reaction, right? It's our fault. And if they only knew, they would be so disappointed. But what that ultimately does is it robs us from the opportunity to freedom. Mm-hmm. It robs us of the opportunity to have deep intimacy, not just with a spouse, but deep intimacy with the one who loves us, God.
Yeah, I did not have that intimacy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
because you can't be close to if you think somebody's disappointed, and you kind of hard to get close to them.
That's right. Yeah. You've already put up some sort of layer or a boundary there to protect yourself from any more rejection or any more pain. And so, sadly, I think in our society, we've just become so, it's just become so easy just to say, let's just end it. Yeah. Let's just move on, because we would rather keep that hidden than to actually experience freedom.
That's true.
It's like being in a dark prison cell with the door wide open.
Yeah.
But it's so hard.
Mm-hmm. It is.
So with your marriage, I mean, so at some point you and your wife, you went through some separation. Is that right?
Yeah, again, when we first started going to counseling, I wasn't strong enough yet to tell her about my past, and she actually wasn't strong enough yet to hear about my past. And I remember our wonderful godly counselor advising me, David, you just continue to pray, ask God to reveal to you when you can talk to her about these things. And so I did. I began praying that, and I also asked God in that prayer that he would confirm that with me through the counselor, that she would agree that, this is the right time. And so he answered that prayer among many prayers that he answered. But we, through counseling, this is not something that the therapist recommended, but through counseling, we determined, and this would be no fault on my wife at all. She was, just completely, really perfect in just about every way. But we did decide to separate. Again, we never talked about divorce, but we decided to separate, and we determined that our healing would be more effective if we were apart from each other than if we were together. So we separated where I lived somewhere else for 8 months, and then we got back together I moved back in after 8 months into the house, and that was a pretty wild experience too, because during that 8 months of separation is when we started, visiting the Catholic Church.
So, what was the motive, right? So, I mean, so you're separated from your wife. You start visiting the Catholic Church. What's the motive behind this?
I could not understand her thing with Catholicism. I was very judgmental about it. But I also realized I want to win my wife back. But one of the most incredible things that happened, the first week that we were separated, probably the lowest point of my life, I felt like such a failure. I go into an organization called LifeWork Leadership, where I'm on the board of directors, and I walked in just as a guest, just as one of our speakers started speaking. This is an organization that is probably 90% Protestant, and a few Catholics come in. But there was a speaker there that was dressed similar to the way I am now, And the Holy Spirit just drew me to this speaker in a way that I don't know that I can think of a comparison. I was just glued to every word that he had to say. And when he finished, I asked somebody, who is that speaker? And they said, oh, that's the priest at St. John Paul II Catholic Church in Nocatee. He was not wearing a collar. I thought that would have been a requirement for all Catholic priests. And I went up to him. I remember this so clearly. I went up to him afterwards and I said, could I please schedule a meeting with you? My wife is thinking about becoming a Catholic and I'm freaking out. Those were my exact words. And he very kindly said that he would be happy to meet with me. And we met and he was pouring into me. Well, I had not, again, I'm separated. I had not told my wife about this. And she is going to church at the parish closest to our house, which is out at the beaches. And a friend at Marian Servants was at the church in Mandarin, and they agreed we need to meet in between and go to Mass together one day. So they met at St. John Paul II Catholic Church, where this priest was presiding. And first of all, when Tammy walked into that church, she was really overcome by the Holy Spirit. And she heard this priest, and she said to herself, this is where David needs to come to church. And she had not realized that I had just met him. And I met him again 2 days after we separated. And it was just so beautiful how Jesus was looking out for me and protecting me and caring for me. And so that's when she said, I want you to come to this church. And I'm like, well, I'm interested too, because I've met this priest. And as soon as I walked in, I don't know if you want to get into some of the stereotypes that I would kind of grew up with hearing about Catholics, but it was so clear how strong the presence of the Holy Spirit was in the church and was just drawing me in. And even though it was over a year, probably a year or two before I committed to joining, really the first time I walked in there, I realized, wow, this is really different than I expected, much better than I expected.
And what serendipity too, to have this, there's a lot of parishes, even at the beaches, there's a lot of parishes in our diocese, but that you would have these run-ins kind of independently. I mean, it's kind of cool because, it is. It kind of goes, to me, I think about two becoming one.
Yeah, that's right.
When we commit ourselves to the vocation of marriage, we are no longer separated, but we are one flesh. Yeah. And so to see God using one person, one parish, despite the distance, really kind of edifies to me.
Yeah.
Two people becoming one flesh.
Yeah, there's just probably more stories than you have time for, but one of the stories that talking about marriage is, so again, we were separated for 8 months, and but we were going to church together. Now you could go back into the churches, and our church in Nocatee was having a mission with a priest named Father Leo, and he was doing his mission on marriage. And so we went, and it was packed out. We got there, and by the time we got there, it was completely packed. And as many of your listeners can attest to, if you get there late, the only place you can sit is the front row. So we literally were on the front row, which is not where we were really comfortable being.
I thought you were going to say the cry room.
I have been there too. When I first heard about the cry room, I thought, is that where people go when they're really overcome by the Holy Spirit? They go. I literally thought that. I'm like, that's really interesting.
That's good, man.
Father Leo kind of ended his talk by asking the couples to stand up and face each other and renew their wedding vows. And here we are, 8 months separated, and it was, neither one of us could really compose ourselves. And I don't know if we were quite ready for that, but we did that, and we got in our car to leave, and we I think I'd already put it in reverse, and I think we both just said, we've got to go see our priest before we leave. And so we went to that priest that I met that very first day, and he was standing there. He wasn't getting the attention then because everybody was going to the visiting priest.
Sure.
And he was just there by himself, and we walked up to him, and he just put his arms around us, and we both just cried like babies. And then my wife asked me to move back home.
Wow.
Yeah.
How wonderful is that?
Yeah. It was like a hen putting their arms around its chicks. I still remember that incredibly warm feeling when he just embraced us, and it was a special night, a great memory.
That is a beautiful memory, man. And what again, an image of a priest in the person of Christ. Yeah. In that moment, it was no longer that man; it was just Jesus, right?
That's right.
Wrapping his arms around you and your bride.
Yeah.
And to think even about the time of separation and coming back to that. And you said something earlier too that I think is worth kind of re-saying, is that you were willing to do anything to win her back.
Right. That's right.
So this desire you had to fight for your bride.
I did have to fight. Yep.
I mean, I can't think of many men who are fighting currently for their brides.
Yeah. True.
Not to be critical of other men, but I mean, in a lot of ways, is this not what the church is? I mean, Christ fighting for us.
So true.
Every single day.
Yeah. Very true.
So, in this moment of you coming back, you initially are. I mean, that right there is probably enough of a miraculous kind of, or a holy moment, big enough to say, I belong here. How long did it take you from coming back home to the wife to really just like coming into Mass with a different perspective? What was that moment for you that really kind of opened your heart, like the one you just described?
Yeah, you would think that I would be smart enough on that night to say, it's time for me to come home, but
so much evidence.
I would still fight it for probably another year and a half. There was just so much. I remember telling my dad. So Tammy did this. She went through OCIA and was so excited to join, but I still was not sure if it was going to be for me. And when she decided to join. One of the things that's so awesome about my wife is that she never 1 second put any pressure on me to join. She knew it needed to be my decision. And I did decide when she committed to joining that I would go through OCIA so that I would at least understand the church. And I remember that first the first class I went to. I don't know that I'll ever forget this. I was so touched. Going through the Protestant church, I had heard so much concern and negative comments about the Catholic Church. I don't know that my dad ever really said anything negative, but I do remember that when Tammy joined, he did tell me that he hopes that I don't join. And I've got a great comeback to that in just a minute. But, I was just a little over 60 at the time, so I didn't have to have my dad's blessing. So him telling me that he hopes I didn't, it was unfortunate to hear that, but I didn't feel like it was going to impact my decision. But I just had that burden on me, and also all the stereotypes that I'd been hearing about Catholics, that, they weren't very close to Jesus, and they didn't read their Bibles, and they don't talk to Jesus, and so many of these things that did not sound very attractive to me. And so when I went to that first OCIA class, I remember the person leading it said, "Hey, we know we have a number of Protestants in this room, and we just want you to know that we believe in the Catholic Church, that those followers of Jesus in the Protestant church and the followers of Jesus in the Catholic Church are going to be in heaven together. And also, we don't ever want to say anything that's critical of your past. So if we say anything that comes across as critical of the Protestant church, would you come and let me know so that I can apologize to you? I was blown away by that, still am blown away by that. That sensitivity and caring and desire for unity, it really touched me. And that first session was like, okay, I'm going to take this serious. So that was a big, great start. And I would say that one of the things that really surprised me and might even surprise some of your listeners is as I continued to hear doctrine of the church taught in OCIA, in just about every single example, I'm like, wait a second, this is the same thing that my Baptist dad taught me. This is really not different than what I grew up in. And there's some differences on things, certainly. But in the things that are going to determine whether we're going to spend eternity with God or we're not, those are really the same that I grew up, same teachings I grew up as the same teachings in the Catholic Church. And that was helpful for me to know that really the doctrine of the most important things, in my opinion, the things that determine heaven and hell are really the same. That was helpful for me. A big concern I had about Catholics was confession. And I just thought it was so, forgive me for using the word stupid, but I just thought it seemed stupid that somebody had to go to a priest to confess, because certainly in the Protestant church we're always taught that you just confess your sins to Jesus and he'll forgive you. And so I read a phenomenal book that my wife gave me called The 7 Secrets of Confession, and it really began to open my eyes to what confession is all about and the role of the priest in confession and how he is there to remind you of God's love and grace and mercy, not to shame you or make you feel guilty, but to remind you of God's love. And so I decided to try it. I had not made the commitment to join yet, but I went to my priest and I said, I don't know if you let somebody that's not a Catholic go through confession, but if you do, I'd like to do it. And so I went into his office. I said to him, I've confessed many times, but not in the Catholic Church, so would you tell me what I need to do? And I hope I never forget his advice, because he said to me, David, just tell me what God is placing on your heart in terms of sins, but I ask 2 things of you. Don't give me any backstory and don't give me any excuse. Just tell me what the sin is. And I thought that was so helpful, because there could be a tendency to say, I did this, but she did that. Or I did this because this happened to me. And I loved that advice. And then I shared them. There was no emotional response really for me. I just shared it. And then he said, would you say the prayer of contrition, which I didn't know that prayer, so he gave it. No. He said, would you repeat after me the prayer of contrition? And it broke me, and I wept out of control. I was crying out of control, which I can only remember that happening one time to me as an adult. And I really didn't know what was going on at the time, but I was snotty, and it was just out of control. I just couldn't control my crying. And it was loud and it was hard. And I just remember the priest coming up behind me and putting his hands on my head, and I could hear the whispers of his prayers as I continued to cry. It took a good while. And what I realized later was that God was giving me the grace to experience the significance of my sins. And I realized that what it was, that my sins are serious business. They're not to be taken lightly. And as a result of that experience, I've always tried to take confession very, very seriously. I try to prepare before I go in. I'll write out what I want to say. I try to, make sure it's a very holy time and not just checking something off the box. And I've had some very, very special moments in confession. And now my view on confession is that my Protestant brothers and sisters are missing out. It's so incredible to be able to have somebody there with you that's not going to judge you or shame you, but is going to remind you of God's forgiveness and is going to remind you of how much He loves you and that His grace and mercy is there for you.
Well, first of all, I want to say regarding that story of confession, that is, I can totally relate to that, and I hope that the listeners can recall one of those special moments, because that is a contrite heart. That is a, when you talk about the act of contrition, that's the whole point, is a contrite heart before God, like so beautiful. And I have some Protestant friends who have agreed with what you just said, that they're missing out. Like that's one of the things. It's for me. It was one of the things that I criticized harshly. It's like confession. I agree. It was weird, right? But more and more people are starting to recognize the benefits of confession, and they recognize that they're missing out. So I agree with that. So that's a pretty. There's so many defining moments, and that's just one more step on the ladder to getting you closer to kind of coming into the church.
Yeah, it's funny. I referenced earlier that I was not a very emotional person before I joined the Catholic Church, but my emotions have really been able to be experienced in the Catholic Church, and I would cry a lot, and I'm proud to say that. I don't know if proud's the right word, but I'm grateful. Let's use that. I'm grateful to be able to cry, because I have come up with a term for those tears, and I just call them my Holy Spirit tears. That I just, I talked about how I felt like God was so disappointed with me. And through the Catholic Church, I was able to really experience for the first time how much He loves me.
Which is the opposite of what we learn about the Catholic Church. It's, guilt, Catholic guilt.
Yes, absolutely. I tell you what, Catholics have nothing on the Baptists when it comes to guilt.
No drinking, no dancing.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, that was special. And Tammy and I decided to renew our wedding vows, and that was a very, have our local priest renew our wedding vows. That was another time that I just broke down in tears. There were plenty of times going to confession when I would have those tears running down, and sometimes just walking into church. I can remember we love to visit other churches when we're out of town, which is quite a bit. And I remember walking into one church in Spring Hill, Tennessee, a church we had never been to before, and I got out of the car to walk into the church, and I start crying before I even get into the doors of the church, just feeling so loved by Jesus and feeling home, even though I didn't know anybody. And I'm really so thankful that my emotions have been able to come alive in the church. So I went to a Lent service in 2020. Is this about to be our 4-year anniversary or 3?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's going to be 4.
That's what I thought. So I went to a Lent service in 2022. We, by the way, as a Protestant, at least the Protestant churches I was in, Lent was not something we had practiced. And so I went to a Lent service, and the priest did it was the night before Lent, and he did a very long sermon or homily on the 7 deadly sins. And then he asked us all to commit to something. And what I just felt really impressed to do, it wasn't giving up something. I just felt like God was leading me to, hey, David, since you're uncertain about this Catholic Church thing, for Lent, why don't you just pray every single day for these 40 days and ask Him if you're supposed to join the Catholic Church? And so that was my commitment, and I was faithful to that commitment. I may have missed a day or two, but I was praying that over and over again. Father, is this the right thing for me to do? And it was, I believe, 2 weeks before Easter, and I still did not know what I was going to do. Let's call it 2.5 weeks. And I had a meeting with my priest to go over a couple of issues that I was still really struggling with, and I didn't know if I could get past those issues. And he had to cancel on me. I wasn't upset. I knew he had an important. I was certain that there was an important reason. We rescheduled it. He had to cancel on me the second time, and his assistant said, "I don't think he's going to get a chance to talk to you before Easter." I was so discouraged. This was on a Tuesday. Tuesday night, I was really. It was on a Wednesday. I was really discouraged. And that afternoon, I had a commitment to do a video shoot in honor of one of the board members at my company who's a devoted Catholic. And I go in there and to my surprise, see you. You're doing this video shoot to honor him as like the Rotarian of the Year, I think was the award. And so I tried to hide. I knew you, Brandon, from Life Work Leadership, and we were both had been involved in the same Protestant church, and I had no idea what your story was, and you had no idea what mine was. But I was discouraged. I tried to hide it and do my best fake self for that video. And when I'm finished, the bishop of the diocese walks in. I had never met him before, and I just couldn't believe he walked in. And I said to you, "Do you mind if I go talk to him for a second?" And you said, "Sure." And I go up to him, and I don't even know what you call somebody like that. So I just said, "Hello, Bishop. My name is David Davis, and I am going through OCIA to join the Catholic Church." And then I remember this loud voice coming from behind me, which was Brandon saying, "I'm joining the Catholic Church also." And I'm like, "Brandon, this is my story, not yours." So no, that's not what I thought.
But the bishop did become the third wheel in that moment.
He sure did.
And you and I embraced each other.
We sure did. I'll touch on that next. But the bishop, I told the bishop, my dad's a Southern Baptist pastor. And every time I told somebody that, the response was the same. They said, "Your dad must be rolling over in his grave." To which I would say, "Well, he's still alive, but he's not real happy about it." But the bishop did not respond that way. When I told him my dad was a Baptist pastor, he had the most beautiful smile on his face, and he said, "I think that's so beautiful that your dad is a pastor." That really touched me. And then he wanted to know if I believed in the Eucharist, and I said, "I'm still trying to figure that out. I think so, but I'm still trying to figure it out." And a few days later, I get, he asked me for my business card, and I gave it to him, and a few days later, I get a package in the mail, and it was from him with a handwritten note, and he gave me a book on the Eucharist, and that meant a lot to me. But so day one of this miraculous answer to my prayers that I had been doing for about 25 days, I guess, was meeting the bishop and finding out that my friend Brandon was going through this also. Day two, I'm heading to North Carolina with my sisters to see our parents who were in failing health in a retirement home. And on my way to pick up my sisters, they call me and say, "Hey, change of plans. We're not going to be able to ride with you. We'll meet you in North Carolina." So now I'm going to be in my car for 7 hours by myself. I'm like, I'm going to try Brandon, and so we can talk more about what happened yesterday. You happened to answer. You give me an hour of your time. You were further along in your journey than I was. You were already all in, and I wasn't quite there yet. And you were really like a mentor to me in helping to answer my questions. And then you told me about this guy named Keith Nestor, and you told me, "Hey, Keith's willing to talk to you." And I take his number and I call him. And I thought, there's no chance he's going to take my call. Who answers calls these days that you don't know the number? And he answered, and he said he had time available, and we spoke for 2 hours. And so the things that I wanted to, he's not a priest, but he was a Methodist pastor. And I had been coming out of the Methodist Church. He was a former Methodist pastor that converted. So we had a conversation on everything that I had wanted to talk to my priest about. And it's starting to creep into my mind, okay, meeting the bishop, finding out about Brandon, Keith Nestor being available, my sister's not being there, so we're able to have all this free time available. And then I hang up from Keith. I call Tammy to tell her about this. And just as we start calling, the phone, I can see I'm getting a call on my phone, and it just says St. John Paul, the Second Catholic Church. I asked my wife, let me see who's calling. I'll call you back. I take that line, and it says, David, this is Father Rich, and I'm so sorry I had to cancel your meeting, but I've got time available now if you can talk. And so again, I have 7 hours on my hands, and 3 of them have been taken, and now I get to spend an hour with my priest to talk to him about what I wanted to talk to all along. And I'm just realizing this is not coincidence. This just can't happen randomly, especially since I've been praying every day. So that Thursday, I had a pretty good idea that God was telling me to join. One of my concerns was how my family would react. So on Friday, I told my brothers and sisters that I was joining. I knew one of them would give me a lot of pushback, but that one was the first one to speak up, and she said, I think it's wonderful. That Saturday, I told my dad that I was going to join, and I asked him if he would watch a homily with me that had really spoken to me on the prodigal son, and he listened to me, and he was just amazed. And he also watched our renewal of our wedding vows, and he was amazed and was so touched by this priest. And so that was good movement forward. And then the big day on Sunday, my parents never miss church. If they can't attend because of sickness, they always watch it on TV. So they were at the nursing home. They couldn't go out, but for the strangest reason, which I know now, they said, no, we're not going to watch our church service today. I said, would you mind if I put on the Mass? My parents were like 93 and 91 at the time and had never seen a Catholic Mass. And so we watched the Mass together. I was certain they would fall asleep. They did not. They stayed focused the entire time. And when the Mass was over, my dad looked at me and he said, I now know why you're joining, and if I wasn't a Baptist preacher, I'd join with you. Wow. And I just, to then get my dad's blessing was so important to me. And then we went to a chapel service together, and it was led by a Presbyterian pastor. And again, I just felt God speaking to me, not in an audible voice, but I just sensed him saying to me, David, I'm with you. I was with you when you were in your other church. I'm with you in the Catholic Church. I'm with you here in the nursing home when you're here with your dad. And it just really meant a lot to me. But yeah, to get my dad's blessing. And then on the day that I joined, so I finally got through my thick head. It's clear that God's leading me to join. And I was then so enthusiastic to join. I just could not wait. And at the Easter Vigil, I forgot something in my car before the service started. I walked to the car and my phone rang, and I looked down. It was my dad. And he just called me, and he just told me he wanted me to know how proud he was of me and how happy he was with what was going on in my life. And he died 6 months later. And so to be able to, to receive my dad's blessing was very, very meaningful to me. So my message to people would be, if you want to know God's will, like I was trying to figure out, just keep asking him and be persistent. And I just felt like after praying for those 25 days or so that he was so happy to answer that prayer in really miraculous ways to make it very clear to me.
And to be in a place of discouragement, God totally flips the script in a matter of moments and gives you like an abundant amount of grace.
Yes, for sure.
In the midst of that discouragement. Like he had something better.
Yes.
He's like, I just got a better plot to the story than the story you want to tell.
Yes.
And that's just how good God is. Mm-hmm. Like your marriage, your life. I mean, every one of these things, like God's story that he wrote for you is just far greater than anything you could have written yourself.
Yeah, my wife would tell you that our marriage, and I agree, but it's nice to hear it from her. She would tell you our marriage is better than ever. July 5th will be our 40th anniversary. And she is so in love with me, and I'm so in love with her, and it's closer than those honeymoon years or anything. It's just the closest we've ever been.
I love your story because it weaves the theme of reconciliation in so many ways. And obviously, I know you. I know our shared vision and hope and longing for a church reconciled, and unity is at the forefront of your mission now. So now that you're here, now that you've arrived, you've become Catholic. You're still very much, you've still very much shown love and support and unified kind of standing with non-Catholics and Catholics. I love that you're still very much involved in both camps.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really important to you is the work of ecumenism and ecumenical initiatives. And I think one of the things I really love that you've done recently is you hosted a gathering at your house with a group of all kinds of people from all different denominations.
Yeah.
Talk about this, if you don't mind. How do you see your story reconciled to the church, reconciled to marriage, unified? The way you fought for your bride, you noticed the way the church is fighting for its bride. How are you joining in on this fight to restore unity between the body of Christ?
Yeah, that's something that I was sensitive to even before I knew I'd become Catholic. It always grieved me when you would be in a church service and you would hear a pastor criticize another pastor. It always bothered me, and I just knew that didn't seem right. And when I became Catholic, it really particularly hurt me when I would hear Protestant pastors say something critical of the Catholic Church, because I knew that what they were criticizing, that person probably has never been in a Catholic church. What they're hearing about the Catholic Church are likely from other Protestants. And, or it could be that they're hearing it from former Catholics that had legitimate pain that they've gone through. But it hurt. And I would get angry sometimes. I'd have to take it into confession. And I remember a priest telling me, David, they don't know. You just have to pray for them and pray that they'll understand. You don't need to be angry at them. You don't need to try to change their view. Just pray for them and trust them in God's hands. And that really helped me. But I do have a real desire to draw believers together. When I've become a part of the Catholic Church, I have not, I still love the Protestant church. I still love the church that I came from. One of the pastors I probably get breakfast with probably 4 times a year. And I'm very close friends with a bunch of the elders at one of the large churches. I used to be their banker. And they're good friends of mine. And I still go to a weekly Bible study at that former church, as well as my men's group at the Catholic Church. And I really just hope that by my witness, that they will see that what I want people to see is what that lady told me the first day at the OCIA meeting, that the followers of Christ in the Catholic Church and the followers of Christ in the Protestant Church are going to be spending eternity together. So let's be united while we're here on earth. And that's what I'm trying to communicate to my circle of influence. And hopefully this interview will start that way. I would, we've referenced Protestants that have some negative views about Catholics, but obviously the reverse is true. There's Catholics that have negative views about Protestants, and there may be some legitimate reasons for those concerns. There may be hurt and pain out there. But Jesus certainly died for all of us, not just for the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church. And I just try to seek to love people. I don't do this near well enough, but I want to seek to love people as Jesus did, and to see people through his eyes, and just try to break down those walls between Catholics and Protestants, and not try to convert a Protestant to Catholic or vice versa, but to just help people to see that, we are all children of God, and Jesus died for all of us. And if we can unite, we're going to do a lot better job of reaching the world if we can be united than if we're separated.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, David, this has been an incredible conversation. Absolutely grateful that we could finally sit down and talk about this.
Me too.
I mean, it just, what a great friend and what a great conversation. And even I've known you for so long,
I know.
and there were still so many aspects of your story that I was like, I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
So I love being behind the scenes of the conversation with you and the bishop while I'm like, what? In my own shock. And
I'm so glad God brought us together like this, and you truly were and are a role model for me and an inspiration to me. You were an important part of my conversion story.
oh, thanks,
and I'm
David.
very grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you too. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching another episode of Ordinary Time. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. God bless.